Hello everyone, this is match 2 of season 16 from the Dominion League. And looking at the board, I see a base set combo here. Not necessarily combo, but a pair of cards that work well together. Festival and Library. Festival Library Engine. And there is quite a bit of support for it on the board here actually. There's Dungeon, which decreases your hand size the first time you play it and can never increase your hand size. It also cycles a bit, so it can help pair your festival and library. So that's going to be immense for that engine. Warehouse performs a similar job. There's also Outpost to play. The 3-card hand can make your library amazing. And there's Rogue to play as well. Seaway is probably not going to be a factor on this board. What is going to be a factor for sure is the Altar. Altar is going to be great for picking up all these 5-cost cards. And is probably what you want to buy before you pick up any festival or library or anything of the sort. So the quickest way I think to get to Altar to build the engine is through a Quarry opening, which is what I end up purchasing here on 4. So the choice on the $3 hand is between the Wishing Well and the Dungeon. I think it is a clear decision. You get the Dungeon here because it synergizes well with what you want to do for the rest of the game with the festivals and the libraries. The other option was to go for a Wishing Well deck, and you just buy a bunch of Wishing Wells and use that for draw, but I think the festival library thing is a lot more powerful. So my opponent opens the same way as I do, and on this 4 I have a choice here between a second Quarry, which I do eventually choose, and a Dungeon. So now my opponent is able to get an Altar there with the Quarry, and I'm able to do the same here, putting a Dungeon into play. So we both have Altars at this point. And you'll see here, this is where my opponent diverges or chooses something different to me. On the $4 hand, goes for a second Dungeon over the Quarry. So now, with the second Dungeon, you'll cycle more, obviously, but with the second Quarry, you can have action cards for very, very cheap. Now, looking back at the game, I think the second Dungeon is the right call here. I get a festival here because I want to make use of these 2 Quarries in my deck by hopefully colliding them with a source of plus buy, and I eventually want the festival anyway. So yes, back to the Dungeon versus Quarry scenario. I think the Dungeon is the right call here because you can really only make use of that second Quarry when you can collide it with a plus buy. So for instance, what you see here is 2 Quarries colliding, and it isn't really giving me any sort of advantage over just the single Quarry. So my opponent is able to play both their dungeons, or at least have both their dungeons in play there, and find their Altar to pick up Festival. Here I think for a bit about what is in my deck, and I try for the festival, the library at this point, sorry. Hoping to connect festival and a library, which is why I buy the festival there over the second Altar. I didn't think the second Altar was necessary, and I didn't want to have too much terminal collision. I thought the single Altar would be enough to get me enough $5 cards, and my opponent I think here is thinking about the same thing, whether or not to buy a second Altar, and they do end up choosing the second Altar. Now I don't know about the second Altar, but you'll see the difference in the decks here between my 1 Altar and my opponent's 2. So I have a soul library here, not happy turn at all, especially having to skip past the festival and the Altar. In general, I think you always play library, because especially when building this kind of engine, festival library, because it's going to find you money. You have the option to skip your action card, so that's why I play the library there. It also cycles a bit. Hopefully I can get around to a more kind shuffle. And 5 here, again the Quarry does nothing for me there, so I'm able to pick up a festival there. Again, deciding against the second Altar, thinking it to be sufficient for my purposes, and my opponent picks up a third Dungeon. Now Third dungeon is probably all the dungeons you want. I think that's all the dungeons I would want. But as is, I don't have anything more than the soul dungeon at this point, and I really do want more because it'll help to pair your cards together, and just the one isn't enough in this biggish deck. I have the starting cards plus a couple quarries to see about, and the one dungeon isn't going to reliably pair my festival and library together. I picked up another festival and library on that turn, in the previous turn, sorry, hoping to kick off somewhat, have a nice pairing of the festival and library, draw a bit, dungeon can cycle, alter into something. It isn't going to be reliable, I know, but I mean, this is what I'm going for at this point. I don't have the second altar, so I have to just try to build the engine. Now, I decided against the second altar. Here, my opponent trashes again with the altar and picks up a fourth dungeon. So that's a lot of dungeons for my opponent. We'll see how it works out for them. Here, I managed to get the quarries down with a source of plus buy. So I get a festival here, and again, I have the choice for the second altar, but I'm going to deny it. At this point, I'm considering between the library and the outpost, really. Also the dungeon, because I really want a dungeon, but it's so hard to spend all this money behind that dungeon. And I opt for two festivals at this point. The reason for that is, well, festival is the only source of plus action, and I'm trying to choke my opponent out of the source of plus actions here. Trying to deny that, but I don't think I do a very good job of it. My opponent is able to pick up the last two festivals while trashing with the altar. Now I'm starting to be scared by my opponent's deck, especially on this turn. I don't see any libraries, but instead I see a bunch of festivals. So I'm able to gain a library here off that estate. So I have one estate left, and the choice on 6 is between, again, the outpost and the library. So really, at this point, I have to hope that my deck just kicks off a good turn, because I'm not nearly as thin as my opponent, and I have to hope for a bit of luck here to speed up my cycling. So I decide against the outpost, going for one more library, and then probably going for the outpost when my deck is a bit thinner and a bit more reliable. But at this point here, I didn't realize how close we were to the end of the game, as my opponent is able to make use of a couple dungeons and gets to pair their festival and library together before me. So, and that's entirely expected given how they played the early second dungeon, and then the subsequent third and fourth dungeons allowed my opponent to find the altars more quickly, and the thinness is really what gave them the win here. I mean, I had some unkind draws like this one here, pair libraries, and then having to go past festival library there is not what you want to see in this kind of deck, but I built the deck this way, so I can't really complain. I pick up the outpost here, nothing else to do really except pick up the outpost, and this is the final turn of the game, believe it or not, because what my opponent ends up doing is going for, so you see here the outpost come in before the library just to reduce the hand size, so the library can get a maximum possible draw. Yes, so the last turn of the game, because my opponent decides to make the play, and I think this is slightly risky and unnecessarily so, because you're already ahead in the trashing and in how well the deck can draw. But my opponent made the play anyway. They got a rogue there, which is fine, you know, lose the quarry, I don't really need it at this point. Although it would be nice to have, and I'm not going to sacrifice that over the festival. So yes, back to the play that my opponent made, which is to empty the libraries here and one dungeon, I believe. Yeah, so there go all the libraries and the one dungeon. And hoping to finish the game on the outpost turn, right? And you have to finish it, seeing my hand here on the outpost turn, otherwise I'm gonna finish it and win. But the three dungeons there, I managed to find the festival and library, and well, you have your choice of action cards at this point, right? So there's no way my opponent is going to stall at this point, and I just decided to resign mid-turn, conceding the game. So that is game one. A nice difference, a little differences between the decks, but it is instructive, and I'll learn from it for sure. All right, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.